When a battle-scarred lion led veteran park ranger Marcus Chen through the treacherous terrain of Kenya's Maasai Mara, neither of them knew they were about to uncover a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about survival, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the face of death. The red dust swirled violently across the savannah as Marcus adjusted his rifle strap and squinted through the haze. 23 years of military service in Afghanistan had taught him to read danger in the wind, and today every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. The drought had been merciless for 8 months, turning the once lush grasslands into a cracked wasteland where desperate animals roamed in search of water. Poachers had become bolder, venturing deeper into protected territory, leaving behind nothing but blood and empty cartridge cases. Marcus wiped the sweat from his weathered face, his prosthetic left leg aching from the morning's patrol. The IED explosion that had taken his leg 3 years ago had also taken his army career, but the Kenyan Wildlife Service had given him purpose again. Out here, protecting the last great herds, he felt alive in a way that civilian life had never offered. His radio crackled with static, the voice of his supervisor barely audible through the interference. Alpha 7, we've got reports of gunshots near Leopard Rock, multiple shots fired, possible poaching activity in progress. Marcus pressed the transmit button, his jaw tightening. Copy that, Control. En route to investigate. He knew the area well, a cluster of ancient granite formations that provided perfect cover for illegal hunters. The rocky outcroppings created natural ambush points, and more than one ranger had walked into a trap there. As he moved across the parched landscape, Marcus noticed the unusual silence. No bird calls, no rustling of small mammals in the sparse grass. Even the ever-present buzz of insects seemed muted. His combat experience had taught him to read danger in the wind, and today every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. The drought had been merciless for 8 months, turning the once lush grasslands into a cracked wasteland where desperate animals roamed in search of water. Poachers had become bolder, venturing deeper into protected territory, leaving behind nothing but blood and empty cartridge cases. Marcus wiped the sweat from his weathered face, his prosthetic left leg aching from the morning's patrol. The IED explosion that had taken his leg 3 years ago had also taken his army career, but the Kenyan Wildlife Service had given him purpose again. Out here, protecting the last great herds, he felt alive in a way that civilian life had never offered. His radio crackled with static, the voice of his supervisor barely audible through the interference. Alpha 7, we've got reports of gunshots near Leopard Rock, multiple shots fired, possible poaching activity in progress. Marcus pressed the transmit button, his jaw tightening. Copy that, Control. En route to investigate. He knew the area well, a cluster of ancient granite formations that provided perfect cover for illegal hunters. The rocky outcroppings created natural ambush points, and more than one ranger had walked into a trap there. As he moved across the parched landscape, Marcus noticed the unusual silence. No bird calls, no rustling of small mammals in the sparse grass. Even the ever-present buzz of insects seemed muted. His combat experience had taught him to read danger in the wind, and today every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. The acacia thorns tore at Marcus's khaki uniform as he approached the rocky outcropping, his boots crunching softly on the brittle grass. The silence was unnatural, pressing against his eardrums like the calm before an artillery barrage. He had learned to trust these moments of stillness. They usually meant death was nearby. As he rounded a massive granite boulder, Marcus froze. There, not 30 yards ahead, lay a sight that made his blood run cold. 3 elephant carcasses sprawled across the red earth, their magnificent tusks hacked away with brutal efficiency. Pools of dark blood had attracted swarms of flies, and the stench of decay hung thick in the motionless air. This wasn't a recent kill. The poachers had been here at least 12 hours ago. Marcus raised his binoculars and scanned the surrounding rocks, searching for any sign of the killers. That's when he spotted movement in his peripheral vision. A lone male lion emerged from behind a termite mound, moving with an odd limping gait. The animal was massive, his golden mane streaked with gray, but something was terribly wrong. Dark stains matted the fur along his left flank, and his right front paw barely touched the ground. The lion stopped approximately 50 meters away and did something Marcus had never witnessed in his 3 years as a ranger. Instead of retreating or showing aggression, the great cat sat down and stared directly at him, not with a calculated gaze of a predator sizing up potential prey, but with an intelligence that seemed almost human. The lion's amber eyes held an urgency that transcended species barriers. Preparing and narrating this story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you're enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.
The behavior was unprecedented. Marcus had studied African wildlife extensively during his ranger training, and nothing in the literature described lions actively seeking human contact. They avoided people whenever possible, unless cornered or defending cubs. This lion seemed to be communicating something urgent, something that demanded immediate attention. Marcus felt every muscle in his body tense as he weighed his options. Military protocol screamed at him to maintain safe distance, call for backup, and treat this as a potential threat. But something deeper, some instinct honed by years of combat in Afghanistan, told him this wounded lion posed no danger. The animal's posture spoke of desperation, not aggression. The lion took another step toward the canyon entrance, then turned back to Marcus with that same piercing stare. Its massive head tilted slightly, as if asking a question. Marcus had seen similar behavior from military working dogs when they found IEDs or wounded soldiers, that urgent need to guide humans to something critical. Against every regulation in the Ranger Handbook, Marcus took a cautious step forward. The lion's ears perked up, and for a brief moment, what could only be described as relief flickered across its scarred features. The animal began moving toward the narrow canyon passage, pausing every few steps to ensure Marcus was following. "This is insane," Marcus muttered under his breath, but his prosthetic leg carried him forward nonetheless. His radio remained silent. The granite formations were notorious for blocking communications, leaving rangers completely isolated once they ventured between the towering rock walls. He was entirely alone with a wounded predator that seemed determined to lead him somewhere. The canyon walls rose on either side, creating a natural corridor barely wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast. Marcus noticed fresh blood droplets on the sandy ground. The lion was bleeding more heavily than initially apparent. Yet the animal pressed on with grim determination, occasionally glancing back to confirm Marcus was still following. 30 meters into the canyon, he heard it, a sound that made his heart skip. Human voices, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, but these weren't the voices of fellow rangers or tourists. The cadence was wrong, the tone conspiratorial. Years of military experience had taught him to distinguish between casual conversation and tactical communication. The lion stopped abruptly and lowered itself behind a boulder, its massive frame surprisingly graceful despite the injury. It looked directly at Marcus, then deliberately shifted its gaze toward a bend in the canyon ahead. The message was unmistakable. Danger lay around that corner, and the lion wanted Marcus to see it for himself. Marcus crouched beside the wounded lion, his heart pounding as the voices grew clearer. The great cat's breathing was labored, but its eyes remained fixed on the canyon bend with unwavering focus. What struck Marcus most was the complete absence of fear between them. This lion, despite its obvious pain in the natural instinct to avoid humans, had positioned itself as his ally. Keeping low, Marcus crept forward until he could peer around the rocky outcropping. What he saw made his blood freeze. 4 armed men in military fatigue sat around a small camp, their weapons far more sophisticated than typical poacher equipment. AK-47s, military-grade radio equipment, and ammunition crates bearing Chinese markings were scattered around their makeshift base. This wasn't a poaching operation. This was something far more dangerous. The men spoke in rapid Swahili mixed with Arabic, but Marcus caught enough words to understand they were planning something massive. References to the convoy, tomorrow night, and the minister's route sent chills down his spine. His military intelligence training kicked in as he recognized the hallmarks of a terrorist cell preparing for an assassination attempt. One of the men, clearly the leader, unfolded a detailed map and pointed to various locations along what Marcus recognized as the main highway leading to Nairobi. Government officials frequently traveled this route, and tomorrow was the day Kenya's Minister of Wildlife Conservation was scheduled to return from a diplomatic mission. The wounded lion beside him remained perfectly still, as if understanding the need for absolute silence. He marveled at the animal's intuition. Somehow, this creature had known
human lives were in danger and had risked its own safety to guide him here. The intelligence displayed went beyond anything documented in wildlife behavior studies. As Marcus watched, the leader produced a satellite phone and began speaking in Arabic to someone he addressed as commander. The conversation revealed the full scope of their plan, a coordinated ambush involving explosive devices and automatic weapons. The minister's convoy would be traveling with minimal security, making them vulnerable to a well-planned attack. The lion shifted slightly, its massive paw accidentally disturbing a small stone that clattered down the canyon wall. All four terrorists immediately grabbed their weapons and looked in their direction. Marcus held his breath, pressing himself against the granite surface as the wounded lion froze beside him, both of them knowing that discovery would mean certain death. The seconds stretched into eternity. As the armed men scanned the canyon walls, their weapons raised and ready. Marcus pressed his back against the cold granite, feeling the lion's powerful body trembling beside him, not from fear, but from the effort of remaining motionless despite its injuries. The terrorist leader barked orders in Arabic, sending two of his men to investigate the sound. Heavy boots crunched on gravel as the militants approached their hiding spot. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, though he knew 4 against 1 with superior firepower meant certain death. The wounded lion's muscles coiled like steel springs, and Marcus realized the magnificent creature was preparing to sacrifice itself to give him a chance to escape. Just as the first terrorist rounded the corner, a massive thunderclap echoed through the canyon. The long-awaited storm had finally arrived, and fat raindrops began pelting the rocky walls. The sudden downpour created a natural camouflage of sound and movement, causing the militants to lower their weapons slightly as they struggled to see through the increasing rainfall. The lion made its move with breathtaking precision. Despite its injuries, the great cat launched itself from behind the boulder with a roar that reverberated off the canyon walls like cannon fire. The terrorists scattered in panic, their disciplined formation crumbling as 800 pounds of apex predator crashed into their midst. Marcus used the chaos to sprint deeper into the canyon, searching desperately for an escape route. Behind him, he heard gunshots mixed with the lion's thunderous roars and the shouts of terrified men. The animal was buying him precious seconds with its own life, displaying a level of selfless courage that Marcus had only witnessed among his fellow soldiers in combat. The rain intensified, turning the canyon floor into a treacherous river of mud and loose stones. Marcus spotted a narrow crevice between two massive rocks and squeezed through just as bullets began ricocheting off the granite around him. His radio crackled to life as the storm cleared the interference, and he heard the blessed sound of his supervisor's voice calling all units. But when he tried to respond, his radio was dead. A bullet fragment had shattered the device during his desperate flight. The gunfire behind him had stopped. In the sudden silence that followed, punctuated only by the steady drumming of rain, Marcus realized the wounded lion had given everything to ensure the terrorist plot would be exposed. Marcus emerged from the narrow crevice 3 hours later, his uniform torn and muddy, his prosthetic leg barely functioning after the harrowing escape through the rocky terrain. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and clean,
but the silence from the canyon behind him weighed heavily on his conscience. He had no way of knowing whether the brave lion had survived its confrontation with the armed terrorists. Using emergency hand signals taught during his military service, Marcus managed to attract the attention of a Kenya Wildlife Service helicopter conducting a routine patrol. Within minutes, he was aboard, frantically explaining the situation to his incredulous colleagues. The captain, Captain Sarah Mbeki, initially struggled to believe Marcus's account of a lion deliberately leading him to a terrorist cell.
The doubt in her voice stung, but Marcus understood the skepticism. His story sounded like the ravings of someone suffering from heat exhaustion or PTSD episodes. Even he questioned the extraordinary events as he recounted them. Lions simply didn't behave this way. They didn't seek out human contact, didn't demonstrate tactical awareness, and certainly didn't sacrifice themselves to protect people. When they reached the canyon, the scene below confirmed Marcus's worst fears and wildest claims simultaneously. 4 bodies lay scattered among abandoned weapons and equipment, while military-grade communications gear remained intact enough to provide crucial intelligence. But there was no sign of the lion, alive or dead, despite the obvious signs of a violent struggle. Captain Mbeki's expression shifted from skepticism to grim acceptance as she radioed headquarters. "Control, this is Eagle 1. We have confirmation of terrorist activity at coordinates 77 Alpha. Multiple KIA, weapons cache secured, request immediate response team and bomb disposal unit." Within 6 hours, Marcus found himself in a sterile government briefing room in Nairobi, facing a panel of stern-faced officials from Kenya's National Intelligence Service. The terrorist plot had been even more extensive than initially apparent. The cell was part of a larger network planning coordinated attacks across East Africa. His discovery had potentially saved hundreds of lives, including that of the wildlife minister whose convoy route had been compromised. Colonel Jomo Kenyatta, head of the National Intelligence Service, leaned back in his leather chair and studied Marcus with calculating eyes. "Ranger Chen, your story presents us with certain complications. We need a clean narrative for the media and the international community. A terrorist cell discovered through routine patrol sounds much more believable than—" He paused, consulting his notes. "A wounded lion providing tactical intelligence." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus felt the weight of institutional pressure settling around him like a familiar uniform. He had experienced this before in the military, when extraordinary events needed to be sanitized for public consumption. The truth was often too strange, too unpredictable for official reports. "Sir, with respect, I know what I witnessed. That lion saved not just my life, but potentially hundreds of others. It deserves recognition, not erasure from the record." Dr. Elizabeth Nyong'o, the government's chief wildlife consultant, shuffled through photographs taken at the scene. "The physical evidence supports an animal attack on the terrorists, but the behavioral aspects of your account contradict everything we know about lion psychology. Lions don't form tactical alliances with humans. They don't demonstrate strategic thinking or sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like justice." Colonel Jomo Kenyatta stood and walked to the window overlooking Nairobi's bustling streets. "Furthermore, Ranger Chen, we have a problem. Our veterinary team found extensive blood trails leading away from the canyon, but no body. If this lion survived, it represents a significant security concern. An animal that has now killed 4 humans, regardless of the circumstances, cannot be allowed to roam free near populated areas." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The heroic lion that had risked everything to expose the terrorist plot was now being classified as a dangerous man-killer. Standard protocol demanded its immediate elimination upon discovery. The very courage that had saved lives would now be used to justify its death sentence.
"We're issuing shoot-on-sight orders to all rangers in the Maasai Mara," Dr. Nyong'o announced, her voice clinically detached. "A wounded lion with human blood on its claws is an unacceptable risk to tourists and local communities. The decision is final." Marcus's hands clenched into fists beneath the conference table. After everything the magnificent creature had sacrificed, this was how the system chose to repay its loyalty, with a hunting party and hollow-point bullets. Marcus walked out of the government building into the blazing Nairobi afternoon, his mind racing with desperate plans. He had 48 hours before the kill order went into effect, 48 hours to find the wounded lion before his own colleagues hunted it down like a common predator. Every instinct from his military days told him this was a suicide mission, but the memory of those intelligent amber eyes wouldn't let him rest. He drove through the night back to the Maasai Mara, his Land Rover's headlights cutting through the darkness as he formulated a strategy. The lion was severely injured and would need water, shelter, and time to heal. Marcus knew the territory better than most. There were only 3 locations within reasonable distance that could provide all 3 necessities. The first location, a seasonal watering hole near Olololo Gate, showed no signs of recent lion activity. The muddy banks revealed only the tracks of zebras and wildebeest that had visited during the previous day's rainfall. Marcus examined every print, every broken branch, searching for any indication that his wounded ally had passed this way. At the second location, a cave system beneath Fig Tree Ridge, Marcus found promising evidence. Fresh blood spots on the rocky entrance suggested a large wounded animal had recently sought shelter. But as he crawled deeper into the limestone caverns, his flashlight revealed only the scattered bones of previous meals and the strong scent of hyenas. Whatever had been here was long gone. Dawn was breaking over the savanna when Marcus reached the third location, a hidden oasis known only to the most experienced rangers. Thick acacia groves surrounded a natural spring that flowed year-round, creating a green sanctuary invisible from the main tourist routes. As his boots touched the soft grass near the water's edge, Marcus held his breath and listened. The sound reached him like a whisper carried on the morning breeze. Labored breathing from somewhere deep within the grove. Marcus moved carefully through the thorny branches, following the sound until he spotted a familiar golden form lying in the dappled shade. The lion's massive chest rose and fell with obvious difficulty, and dark stains covered much of its left side. But when Marcus approached, those intelligent amber eyes opened and focused on him with unmistakable recognition. Despite its pain, despite every natural instinct, the great cat's tail moved in what could only be described as a greeting. Marcus knelt beside the wounded lion, his hands trembling as he assessed the damage. 3 bullet wounds traced ugly paths across the animal's flank, and a deep gash on its right shoulder suggested a close encounter with a knife or machete. Yet, despite the obvious agony, the lion remained calm in his presence, its breathing steady and trusting. "Easy, big guy," Marcus whispered, slowly removing his field medical kit. His combat medic training had taught him to treat all kinds of wounds, though never on an 800-pound predator. The lion watched him with those remarkable eyes, occasionally rumbling deep in its chest, not a growl of warning, but something that sounded almost like communication. As Marcus cleaned the wounds with antiseptic, he noticed something extraordinary. The lion deliberately positioned itself to give him better access to the injuries, shifting its massive body with obvious discomfort to expose the damaged areas. This level of cooperation went beyond anything documented in wildlife veterinary literature. The animals seemed to understand that Marcus was trying to help. Working quickly, Marcus sutured the deepest wounds and applied field dressings designed for human soldiers. The lion never flinched, never showed aggression, even when the treatment must have caused considerable pain. Instead, it maintained steady eye contact,
as if drawing strength from their unlikely partnership. Radio chatter from his abandoned Land Rover interrupted the medical procedure. Marcus could hear multiple ranger units coordinating their search patterns, their voices growing closer with each transmission. The kill order was already in effect, and professional hunters were systematically covering every known water source and shelter in the reserve. "Listen to me," Marcus said, surprising himself by speaking directly to the lion, as if it could understand. "They're coming for you. You saved my life, saved all those innocent people, but they don't care about that. To them, you're just a dangerous animal now." The lion's ears perked up at the sound of approaching vehicles in the distance. With tremendous effort, it struggled to its feet, muscles straining against the pain of movement. But instead of fleeing deeper into the wilderness, the magnificent creature did something that left Marcus speechless. The lion moved closer to him, pressing its massive head against Marcus's shoulder in a gesture of unmistakable affection. For 30 seconds, predator and protector stood together in perfect understanding, sharing a bond forged in violence and sealed in mutual respect.
The lion stepped back and looked directly into Marcus's eyes one final time, then turned toward the approaching sound of vehicles. But instead of running, it began walking slowly toward the ranger convoy, its head held high despite the obvious pain. Marcus realized with growing horror what the noble creature intended to do. "No, wait!" Marcus called out, but the lion continued its deliberate march toward certain death. It would face the hunters on its own terms, sparing Marcus from having to choose between his job and his conscience. Just as the first ranger vehicle crested the hill, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He stepped out from the grove, placing himself directly between the lion and the armed rangers, his hands raised high in the air. "Stand down!" he shouted. "This animal is under my protection." Captain Mbeki emerged from the lead vehicle, her weapon drawn but lowered. "Marcus, step away from that lion. You know the orders." "This lion saved hundreds of lives," Marcus replied firmly. "It deserves better than a bullet." The standoff lasted only moments before Marcus's radio crackled to life. Colonel Kenyatta's voice cut through the tension. "All units, abort mission. We have new intelligence suggesting the lion's behavior was part of a larger pattern. Dr. Chen's account is being reviewed for a special commendation." As the Rangers lowered their weapons, the wounded lion limped back to Marcus's side and sat down, as if it had known all along that truth would prevail. 6 months later, the lion, now called Simba by local Maasai elders, became the first wild animal in Kenya's history to receive official recognition for service to the nation. Marcus still patrols the Maasai Mara, but now he's never alone. Simba, fully recovered and bearing scars like battle ribbons, walks beside him as an unofficial partner in protecting the wilderness they both call home. What do you think of this incredible story? Have you ever witnessed animals displaying human-like intelligence? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing wildlife stories that will change how you see the natural world.